As a fundraiser, you care deeply about changing the world, and you're working hard to make a difference for a cause you're passionate about. And that means you probably also struggle with setting boundaries that protect your energy and time. For today's episode, Richard and I are handing it over to Kendrick, our Senior Director of Learning, and special guest, Nneka Allen, founder of the Empathy Agency, for a great conversation on how to prioritize your own needs and find more fulfillment in your work.
Welcome to today's podcast. I'm Kendrick, and I'm taking over the podcast today while Jeff and Richard take the day off. Fundraising is often seen as sacrificial work. There's a cultural expectation that fundraisers must be willing to do whatever it takes to support the organization's mission, and that they need to do it for a much lower salary than they would get elsewhere. But this culture needs to change. It's time for you to see your value, see your power, and start loving yourself, because it is truly the key to more deeply connecting with your donors and supporting your mission, not to mention how it affects the wonderful things in your life as well. And I'm thrilled to have Nneka Allen, principal and founder of the Empathy Agency, Inc., as a guest today. Nneka, why don't you give our audience a quick introduction before we get started?
Thanks so much, Karen. It's wonderful to be with you today and to be with your listeners. My name is Nneka Allen, and I am a relationship builder, a stone catcher, a freedom fighter, professional coach, and a storyteller. I am a daughter of the Underground Railroad. I am a sixth-generation Canadian. I'm a mama, and a dog lover. I have two doggies, Sophie and Sammy, and I live here in Abbotsford, British Columbia, with my daughter and her husband. And we live on the unceded shared territory of the Sumas and Musqueam First Nations. And I honor the survival of the Indigenous nations on Turtle Island, despite genocide. I recognize the theft and the subjugation of colonization and white supremacy culture that they have endured. And as a forced inhabitant of these beautiful territories myself, I'm challenged to confront the cost of living on this land, and I am truly grateful for the historic relationship that exists between my Indigenous and African ancestors, and I'm really glad to be with you today.
Thank you, Nneka. Stonecatcher, you must tell me what that is before we go forward.
Oh, yeah. I first read that term in the book Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, which is a phenomenal book. It's also has been made into a movie, but I much prefer the book. And he is an attorney in the South of the United States, and he predominantly defends people who are on death row. Mm-hmm. And so the book is much about that. He's also the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, which is absolutely.
I've heard him speak.
Yeah, I have too,
yes.
Which is profound. And so in his book, there's a story he tells. He's talking with an older woman, and she uses the term stonecatcher, and I won't give the story away, but what it is essentially is a person who's willing to step in front of another to catch the stones that are thrown in their direction. And that imagery very much resonated with much of my life and the way I want to be in this world going forward. So
thank you.
That's how it made it into my bio.
All right. Now, you and I share a passion for creating a culture where we are unapologetically loving ourselves and taking care of our needs so we can bring ourselves more fully to our life. But let's start by discussing what we mean by self-love, kind of broadly, what that means to us personally. And then later on, we're also going to dive into how that relates to our sector and fundraising. So get us started, Nneka.
Yeah, so it's interesting as I started to think about, the topic of self-love, the thing that really immediately emerged for me was the work of Bell Hooks. And I don't know if you've read her book, All About Love, but that book is transformational and is a constant resource to me. And in that book, she shares a definition of love by M. Scott Peck. And it is really quite transformational it was transformational in my understanding of the concept of love, or the act of love. And he writes, love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. I think it's important to note here, when they're referring to spiritual growth, they're not talking about it in the context of religion. They're talking about the truest parts of who we are as human beings. And so Bell Hooks goes on to write, when we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful or abusive. And so that definition has really stretched my value of love, my understanding of it, the behavior of love. And it has really forced me to begin to sort of like wrestle with, what does this look like in operation if I'm going to be truly grounded in nurture for myself and for others.
And I was thinking about, so many different faith groups speak about this, and the piece that actually Jesus did around love others as you love yourself, I don't think we really paid that much attention to, and how it's so intertwined, right? That whole piece around loving yourself and loving others. And
yes,
just this morning as I walked outside to let my dog out, looking at the trees and taking a moment, and then my head goes to all the things I need to do and how I'm not doing all that, the little negative self, talk starts. Bringing that back to a breath and what's true and what's real. I mean, that was being harmful. That was that negativity, that part of us that causes harm to ourselves. So all that we're going to be talking about today is how do we think about love, talk about love? How does it play out in our lives? What gets in the way? And how do we every day in each moment make different choices for ourselves and for those we work with, for our sector? And what are some of the things we can look at in that process? All right. So talk a little bit more about your journey with self-love. What has been impactful, important as you have been looking into this, passionate about it, wanting to grow that part of who you are?
Yeah. So love is one of my top 2 values. So it has this really central feature in my life, even though I didn't know it was one of my top 2 values until I did that work. But when I look back retrospectively over the course of my life, I can see how it very much is centered in the way I want to be in the world, in the way I just most naturally show up in the world. And I believe love looks like a bunch of different things, right? It's not just warm and fuzzy and hugs and kisses, and it can also be truth, right? It can also be boundaries. In fact, I think it is boundaries, right?
I'll talk about that in a minute. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I may have mentioned to you on one of our previous conversations that Brene Brown's definition of boundaries just gives me such a great mental image of love in operation. She says, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And so it sounds sort of straightforward, but when you go to apply that in a circumstance, the wrestling begins.
Yeah,
and I think that wrestling is a part of love too. Right? I was recently on a 6-week Sabbath during the month of December and into January. And one of my greatest challenges was maintaining the boundaries I had set for that rest period. And what I noticed was that my issue was really with some dissatisfaction that I was feeling about needing to reassert the boundaries. I felt like I've already said what the boundaries are. I don't want to say it again because it's uncomfortable. And then I turned to, so I don't understand, why aren't they just like abiding by the boundaries that I've set? And so the more I sort of dug into that, right, I realized it was just my own resistance wanting to just reestablish those boundaries. Like, what's wrong with that? Why not? And
So
it was
first,
a real act of love to do that, to like
yes.
reassert them, right? Towards myself.
I think a lot of us are sitting around waiting for someone else, not before we even set a boundary, to give us that boundary, right? To give us that peace we want, to give us that space we need, or whatever it might be. Like somehow we're waiting for someone else to do it for us.
Yeah.
So then we finally learn to do it, to set some boundaries. Then it's learning that it's not like a one-time said deal. And it may be that in one situation, this is a boundary you want to set. In a similar situation, you have a different boundary. It's movable. I remember learning with my kids. I have 3 kids who are adults. And they've learned that, there's no guarantee. You ask mom for something, she checks in with her intuition. She may or not comply. And then I finally learned I don't have to figure out all the possible things and set up my black and white strategy and do's and don'ts. And then the tough thing is learning to then understand, I guess I love that, the wrestling of, everybody else has their issues they want solved too. So if they're pushing back again, it's not necessarily even personal. So it's an act of self-love and a love toward them too, because if you don't do that, then where's your relationship going to go, right? If you comply and you're pissed. So that wrestling with reasserting your boundary again, clearly and in a grounded way, versus how I used to do, which is no boundaries, then I'd finally get to a point where I would be like, I set a boundary like, I've just gone to war. Very over dramatic. So I think learning that to do it more often, sooner, more from a grounded, clear space, come back to that is it's a practice, right? It's something you have to practice.
It is. And it really challenged, me to think about what assumptions do I hold around this notion of respecting boundaries, right? Or just abiding by boundaries. I had a bunch of assumptions about that, what that looks like. You put it down once, you're good, right? And then it's no longer an issue. When in reality, like you said, I think that the frequency with which you're able to reiterate those boundaries and understanding that those boundaries can also be fluid, depending on what's happening, right? You may, again, it's the distance at which that I can love you and me simultaneously. And so we're not the same person today as we are tomorrow and the next day, right? And so there's like that reassessment, I think, that needs to happen. And in order to reassess, you have to be present with yourself, which I think is an act of love towards oneself.
That learning to be present with myself was, for me, the biggest impactful thing in my journey, I think, because I started the journey of like counseling, women's groups, all kinds of things, because I lived very anxious inside all the time, guilty and anxious. I was brought up to be a good girl, to be cooperative, to be nice, all those things, right? And I think there's a lot of women fundraisers who may have experienced that way of growing up. And so I was like, wow, I live so anxious, right? And I was doing a training years ago, I've told this story before, but with a colleague of mine, and it was tough. It was about race, gender, LGBTQ issues and corporate settings. And I asked my colleague who'd done a lot of trainings with me, I'm like, Hassan, how do I come across in training thinking I'm going to get a compliment? I thought I was pretty good. He's like, you're kind of an ice queen. I was like, oh, me, an ice queen? Well, it was beginning of me understanding I was not in my body. I was checked out because I'm so in tune with people. I'm so sensitive. That anxiety I felt all the time was partially mine, partially everybody else's. And so learning that who I am as a person, how my system works, and doing more body-centered somatic work
Yes.
I work with horses. I mean, all of that to really tune into how do I stay in my body, stay present, and know what's happening and tune in was a huge part of being able to, for me, my superpower is my heart. And it's very courageous, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't be in that space when I wasn't present in my own body. So that was
Yes.
a huge shift for me, huge shift. Then I can listen to my intuition. I can
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of information. Yeah, made a big
Yeah.
difference.
I found slowing down, just slowing things right down, is the primary game changer for me, because the things that I can hear fundamentally change when I allow time to bend.
So what does that look like? Let's talk about that. So we're, and we'll get to our sector in just a minute, but you've got a work thing coming up. Maybe it has some energy around it. How do you use time to help you bring in your intuition, your wisdom? What's that look like?
So, I believe that as humans, we are powerful beyond belief. I believe when we step into spaces, we influence those spaces, whether we are aware of it or not. And so I have committed myself to stepping into spaces and being who I am, which is, a Black, Indigenous woman. And that alone will frustrate a white dominant society. And so that act of just stepping into the space and being me, who I am, suspending the expectation to assimilate, is the first act of self-love for me.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in spaces where I am either coaching or facilitating. So I have a measure of power in the space. And so I am always asking myself, how can everyone be powerful? And I let the answer to that in any given situation begin to inform the way I design space and time with people. And so when I'm creating a space, I am doing deliberate things to frustrate white supremacist culture, which is very rigid and which is absolutely time bound and which does not value who we are. It's more interested in what we can produce. And so I use music. I start meetings with music so that we can get into our bodies, hopefully harmonize our bodies. I spend time talking about how we will work together versus what we're going to do. I check in with people and ask them, and I also answer, what do you need right now to feel seen and heard? So that we can actually locate what is real for people in that moment, so we can meet them there. And I find when we begin with just those three things, those are just three examples, we begin to slow time down.
Yeah.
Giving permission to go slow. I was facilitating a session just yesterday, and the group were in Toronto. And so it was the end of their day, and they showed up in session, and I was playing a little Marvin Gaye. And I heard a little bit of like I could, there was like these responses that just, and we just let the song play. We didn't talk. We just let the song play. But I could tell by the expressions on the face, something was happening, like something had happened or was happening. And as facilitators, me and my co-facilitator, we didn't know what was necessarily going on. But that's the real beauty of that question. What do you need right now to feel seen and heard? Because what we immediately learned was that this whole group of leaders had just come out of back-to-back meetings.
Hmm.
They were landing in this session where they needed to like imagine a new way forward.
Mm.
And they were all saying in some way, shape, or form, I don't really have the energy to like step into this space. And so they were like, I don't know, like we're here, but I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because we gave them permission to just slow it right down, they ended up producing some really creative work. And on exiting, some of them were saying they felt energized. So that's just an example of what it could look like, you know, in practice.
Yes, I've seen you do that with us. A group of us at Veritus have joined the incredible Collecting Courage new training, helping us really dive into diversity and equity issues in our sector. And that's how you really started with us, is to slow us down, get us present with how we want to be together. And I think about how our culture, you know, the white supremacy culture, our culture,
Yeah.
my culture, has been all about getting the most done the least bit of time and thinking it's always the most efficient way, and treating us like machines in our system, in our sector. You know, you're going to get there in time, you're going to work all day, it's going to be straight, you're going to be productive. And when we're not feeling that we're always beating ourselves up. We feel badly, we're not doing enough. And the exhaustion of just even believing that, and then always beating yourself up for not delivering.
Yeah.
And how the story you just told of shifting into that different gear of connecting to ourselves, to each other, to what we need, then allows the space for that. And I feel like our intuition just hooks into like everything in the whole universe.
Yes.
So like I got a great computer right there whenever I need it, in the sense, you know, like the guy who discovered, you know, invented the car or whatever, he was just walking to the park and the whole thing came to him. You know, I think it's kind of interesting, right? We need that space for that wisdom to come through. So I thank you for, I know you do that because I'm experiencing it in your incredible training. Let's talk about how all this relates to our sector. So you and I have talked a little bit about our journey. You know, our sector is supposed to be about love, right? Helping the world, the universe, the planet, the animals, to making a difference. We think it's about love.
Yeah.
And then what happens, Nneka? What happens in our sector?
Well, when we don't understand that love is a verb and it's an act, we turn it into all sorts of other things that are transactional. I would say too often in our sector, we forfeit the relational for the transactional. What you just described is an example of that too, right? This notion of we want you to work like a machine, right? And the relational is not a one-way relationship. It is a reciprocal thing. It's in its relationship with self and its relationship with others. And so if we have to forfeit all of that in order to show up and do our work in a way that, you know, is expected, how can we bring love? You know, I would say that, you know, the concept or the act of love is incongruent with transactions. Right? I don't know if we would ever put those terms together in a sentence, right? But when we think about relationship, love sits very central. So the question that comes up for me when I hear that is, well, who does our sector love? Because they don't love everyone.
Love that question. Who does our sector love? First thing that comes to my mind is I'll include, you know, myself in this sector, we love the idea that we're doing good. We love the idea that we're doing good. We're not necessarily loving those we serve. Many times we're victimizing or
exploiting.
We're not loving our fundraisers and our team members. We're expecting them to work
More
70-hour
harder,
weeks, cover many
with
jobs
less. That's
for
right.
no money.
That's right.
We're not many times loving our donors because we're not in relationship with them. We're treating
Mm-hmm.
them transactionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we determine their worth based on how much money they have.
Mm-hmm. Or even then, even if they do have a lot of money, we're treating them transactionally. They're ATM machines versus a relationship with a human.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're loving anybody. Are we loving anybody?
I don't think so.
We're loving an idea, maybe.
We're
It's
loving,
very-
we're loving an idea. And that for me is tremendously challenging when you think about the role and purpose of our sector, which is really about social change,
Yeah.
right? Social change, not just for the sake of change, but social change so that people can thrive, so that people can belong, so that people can be loved.
Yes. Yes.
You know, the relationship between love and belonging is a fascinating one, right? We need belonging just as much as we need love as human beings. Our need for them is equally as deep.
Yes. And I think about relationships I've been in or work settings I've been in where I don't feel like I can show up as my authentic self. I don't feel belonging. And the love of myself and the love of others and the gifts I bring, they don't happen. They don't happen. Where, like right now, I'm in a workplace and a place in life where there is belonging, there is love for self, and there is a space for me to bring myself fully. Yes. Whether that's in wrestling with difficult conversations or whatever that might be, there's space for that and allowance for that. So there's what you gain from everyone learning to come to the table and belong and bring their full selves is incredible. It's incredible.
And so if you compare sort of the quality of the work that you were able to do in either one of those circumstances, what's the marked difference that you can identify?
Previous, it was fear-based. It was small thinking. I was in fight and flight. There was not an ability to think broadly or creatively or outside the box or be excited and build great partnerships, or it was small-minded thinking, protective.
Well, I believe the opposite of love is fear. And you said fear-based thinking, right? And I think that a lot of people in the sector work from a place of fear. I know fear was a central feature of my fundraising career, namely because I was the only Black woman, Black person in every organization that I had worked for, with the exception of the first place where I worked at the museum I write about in Collecting Courage. And, you know, that is no way to live and to be in the world. And so if we're coming from a place of fear, then love, there's no room for love.
Yeah.
Like real love, you know, the love like I described at the beginning, that's nurturing of one's own self and of the other, right? So I'm listening to this podcast and I'm a fundraiser. I'm not working in a place that I feel like in bountiful ways creates that opportunity for me, in the very least. So what are some things that I can take away, that I can think about, that I can process for myself from this conversation? And I'm not trying to end us out yet, but I'm just thinking about, okay, so we just talked about how there ain't love. There ain't no love. So as I'm thinking about myself as a fundraiser in that place of fear, what choices, where do I have power? Where do I have control? Where do I have choices, Nneka? So one of the things that our collective, the Black Canadian Fundraisers Collective, spend a lot of time talking about with our members is our autonomy. And really understanding that we have choice and we have voice. And I think that's the first thing to recognize and to accept, is that you're not stuck. And you can choose differently. And so if you're in an organization that you feel is harming you, I say leave. Take the steps that you need to take to leave. Do that in community with people who care for you and can care with you through that process. If you're in an organization and you think, there's some work that can be done, if you have some allies or co-conspirators in your network that can come alongside you to maybe help the organization see another way. Again, don't do that alone.
Yeah.
You need community with you to do that. But in every scenario, whether you leave, stay, choose to challenge the organization to another way of being, I think the most liberating part is the simplest part, which is you have autonomy and you have choice. And so as you begin to contemplate maybe some of the things that we've shared here about what love is, and how love behaves, and how that might show up in a workspace, you can use that information to determine what next organization you want to be in, right? You now have, you can begin to articulate and really define the sort of environment that would invite your truest self to contribute and to be, right? To be in the space or in the organization. And so that's feedback that I give frequently to members of our collective. You have choice and you have voice. Your autonomy is yours and you can do something with it. And we are here as a community to support that. So if you tell us what that is, we'll go with you.
I love the autonomy piece. And I know for me, a big learning was, before I would see leaders in power, so I would just tell them, I have this problem. I'm working too many things, too many hours, maybe complain about it a couple times, hope that they do something about it. So, having autonomy and stepping into having my own power would be how I would do that differently. What I've learned is, let me list all the things I'm being pulled into and doing. Let me list the percentage of time they're taking. Let me show how much time that actually allows for me for fundraising.
Yes.
And how that only will allow this percentage of my goal. And, come to a leader with a really clear picture of what's happening and a solution. To me, that's learning to have autonomy to come. And now if the leader then is like, I don't care, tough cookie, then I need to get out of here right now.
Yes, 100%.
A lot of times leaders are just overwhelmed and scared and running, and they don't know how to solve problems either. So learning also to have that voice.
Yes.
And give it a whirl in a way that gives a leader an easy way to support you, and doing that with others in support as well is really
you raise a great point around communication. Our ability to communicate with one another, I think, is an important companion to our ability to love ourselves and to love others. And I think we should always be asking ourselves, have I communicated clearly what I need?
Yeah.
And or what I want in this circumstance, right? And that does require some of that reflective work that you were just describing, which is, here are all the things that are going on for me. Here's the percentage of time. I understand that my priority is fundraising, that I see there's some incongruence here. And I'm wondering what you see. You can bring curiosity to that with your leader. But you first have to do some of that reflective work to really see, okay, what is on my plate? What is happening? What is leading to this experience that I'm having? Absolutely.
So I want to come back later to what are some of the questions I can ask if I go into a new job, an interesting new location, to find out if this will be an environment of love. But
Mm-hmm.
let's go back just for a minute to, all right, so in my daily life and work, as I'm wanting to practice more self-love as a fundraiser in my work, help me a little bit with what does that look like? How am I on in a daily way, wanting to grow and develop my self-love, my ability to set boundaries, whatever all that includes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's going to sound repetitive. I think the slowing down, so you can listen to your body, so you can listen to what you need, is really quite central. I can remember, early in my career, and I was a young mom, and my mornings were really a Bronco ride. Like by the time I got in my car, I felt like I had achieved something, just because like I had overcome all the things. Like, alarm goes off, you hit the alarm, jump in the showers. It's just like, go, 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 go. Did I get in the car on the right time? Yeah, I did. Okay, yeah, success. And if you do that enough,
Yes.
and for a long enough period of time, you know what the result is.
Yes.
And I can remember, my daughter's father's mother, so my ex's mother, saying one time, I need my mornings to be slow. So I just, I get up a little bit earlier and I come downstairs and I make some coffee. And she just started to describe like how she just sits with herself and I don't even remember all the details of what she said, but I remember thinking, I wonder what that would be like. And then I started thinking, so what would I have to do to rearrange my life in order to do some of that? And I just started from where I was, and it may have been, 30 minutes because of how what was going on in my life, but it completely changed how I was like showing up to work.
Yes.
Right now, I would say I spend an hour to an hour and a half by myself doing all kinds of fun things in the morning, just so that I can check in with me and think about my day and be really intentional about the things that are coming up, sensing, okay, so I have this thing I'm getting ready to do today. Where am I at? What might I need so I can get more ready, or just be more of my truest self when I show up into that space. And so I would say that's probably the number one thing that I changed, that had a tremendous impact on just how I was in my work. I mean, our work is so focused on relationships and being, right? And so while we might be showing up and saying all the right words, what are people feeling?
Yeah.
Not just within themselves, but feeling from you. Right? And so I believe settled bodies settle bodies. And my predisposition is not to be that way. It is to like get the thing done.
You're an intense, get it done kind of lady.
I am. And so it's been a lot of practice to value being, right, over doing, and allowing that to really shape how I organize my life and my work. And so I would say, how can you prioritize you at the top of your day? And it could be small, it could be in small ways. Like I can remember, doing all little things for myself at points in my life where I just was, motherhood was overwhelming, and the job was overwhelming, and just so many things going on. But if I could just do like one or two little things that I know that were just for me, right? it began to give me that space to have a little delight, a little joy.
Mhm.
It changes you.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I just wrote a blog series. I love this whole article around you can't you can control how much energy you have, but not how much time. Time is sort of set, but you can curve time if you develop your energy. It seems like you have more
You
time.
can.
You get
You
more
can.
done if you do less.
That's
So,
exactly right. But then
uh-huh.
and then oftentimes it's the permission to do less.
Mhm.
You don't
Mhm.
have to do it all.
And they did all these, as they taught people to do what you were just saying, spend some time in the morning, every 90 minutes, take a break, go for a walk, get a breather, get outside, just do, our bodies are in these natural rhythms, and to allow these breaks and make sure that we're building space mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, in all those
Yes.
areas. And how much more energy would we then have to then be really more productive, because we're more focused and
Yes.
smaller chunks of time. So it is so powerful to take that moment. When I start feeling tight and frustrated, I used to just push myself more. And now it's like, oh, I need to really step back and do something different and get a different perspective, because this space is not it's not loving myself or anybody else, right?
That's exactly right. What I hear you describing is margin. So, how do we design our lives with margin?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're not incentivized to do that.
Yeah.
But I believe that designing your life that way is an act of loving yourself, because things occur, things pop up, and you want to be available to them. I can remember really being focused on wanting to be present for my daughter whenever she showed up with something going on. I wanted to be able to be present. And that doesn't come from a vacuous place. You have to actually have a reservoir, right? To do that. And so, okay, what fills the reservoir? And so I think I mentioned to you in one of our recent conversations that I'm pursuing softness. Like, how can I invite more softness into my life? And I don't know what that looks like in tangible ways. I'm sort of, discovering it as I go. And the way I'm discovering it is more through questions than answers. But the questions are really curious. So one of the questions that occurred to me as I was sitting in my living room looking out onto the trees and mountains, one of my dogs was playing on the floor, and he often will come over to me and paw me when I'm doing things. And we've been trying to teach him off. And I thought, well, what would change for me if I was able to give him 2 minutes every time he pawed me? Like, if I could just pause what I'm doing, turn and engage in that moment, which is always, delicious, right? It's just so sweet. And then come back to the thing that I'm doing. That's okay. So what do I have to do so that I can do that? Just, as a query. And so margin is one of the ways, right? Don't pack your schedule, Nneka, to the point where if my daughter knocks on the door and has to ask me a question that I can't deal. I know I have to talk to you later. Or when the dog comes over and just wants a little snuggle, I can't indulge, right?
Yes.
Just as two sort of common, I think, experiences that people might have.
My little dog Polo, who's sleeping right now, will appreciate that one.
I
We'll start
that.
practicing that with him. And they probably do it when we probably need a break.
Well, this is the other thing, because they can sense, what's happening for us. And yeah, I mean, I think, for pet lovers, I think pet lovers would agree, we have things to learn from animals and the environment, the inanimate world. There are lessons there for us. And so how do we what posture do we need to take in order to receive those messages? And I think that posture has a lot to do with loving ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, I teach leadership training using horses. When I would go into my horse's stall to take her to go do fun things, I'd hold up her halter and she would just look at me and walk away. Like, girl,
Not
you
now.
are way too much. You need to get yourself
No.
together. And I would have to stop and tune in. Sometimes I would have tears. Whatever was going on for me, I needed to like be with. And then I'd look at her like, she kind of like, not yet.
Not
And then when
quite
I
yet.
had gotten more present, then she'd come right over and we could go play. So I love all that's other humans and animals and all that help us as our litmus test, right, of how we're showing up in our more
It's
soft
true.
ways.
It's
So
true.
I want to wrap this up, and this has been such a great conversation. I do want to ask you, before we talk about sort of final words of wisdom, if I'm interviewing in an organization and I'm wanting to find a place that I can show up and be my authentic self, practice self-love and love of others, what would I be looking for or asking in my interview process?
So two things. One, if you want to know if an organization is going to be open to your truest self, show up in that interview as your truest self.
Yeah.
No substitute for that right there, right? Yeah. Show up as your truest self in the interview. I would also recommend that everyone should know what their top 2 values are, but not just the values, the behaviors that support the values. Like what does it look like in operation? Because you need to be able to connect what's really important to you personally to what's really important to the organization. And so every organization has values. Very frequently do those organizations tether behaviors to those values. But what you can do is you can begin to ask them about what those values that they espouse look like in action. That's a really great way to begin to get a sense for whether or not they're living their values. You should be able to get a sense of culture, at least a peek into culture from their response. And I think more than anything, if you are seeking to align your values with the organizational values and you're asking those sorts of questions, you have to, and I think this is the hardest part, trust your instinct. What is your instinct telling you about that experience, that organization as it was presented to you in the interview? And honor that.
Because someone can be saying all the right things, but inside you're like the dog going, something is not matching up. So if they're if someone's incongruent, what they're saying is not really what they believe or do, they will give you that uneasy feeling.
They will. Ask them for examples too. So when they say this is what the behaviors look like, can you give me an example of that? Like, what does that look like? Can you tell me a time where you've really embodied that? Ask them for examples. When you get into storytelling, now we know this to be absolutely true, because when we watch movies that don't ring true to us, how do we know that? When we hear stories that people tell me, like, I don't know if I don't know, right? When they start to tell the story of how those values show up in their organization, you will be able to get a read on, if you're listening, on whether or not that's believable. It's hard to make up a good story, like a real authentic story in the moment. It's hard.
I love that. That's so beneficial. Those are really clear steps to use and take. All right. So what do you want someone to walk away with today, Nneka? You said so many beautiful things. This has been incredible. What's a parting piece that you want to either say again or add to what you've shared already?
I do have an idea. Do you mind if it's not my words?
Not at all.
This is what comes up for me. And this is from the NAP ministry, who I adore.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Softness is available to us. Care is available to us. Rest is available to us. Intimacy is available to us. Community is available to us. Sleep is available to us. Justice is available to us. And pleasure is available to us.
That's really, really beautiful. Thank you so much for reading that. That was beautiful. It was just perfect.
Thank you, Karen.
So to close us out, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Nneka. This has been an incredible conversation, and I hope it's inspired you to invest a bit more, I hope a lot more, in loving yourself. And if you want to connect more with the work Nneka is doing at the Empathy Agency, you can click on the link to check out her website in the episode description. And if you want to learn more about how Veritus Group can support you in creating better balance and healthier boundaries to help you find more joy and love in your work, we'd love to connect with you. You can reach out to us at the link in the episode description or by emailing us at hello@veritusgroup.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.